So it's that time of the season now, the awards are flying left, right and centre. So I thought, as it was the EFL Awards ceremony last week, and I thought I'd do my own version. So let's have a look at some Championship awards. Welcome back to the channel, hope you're doing well. Of course, my name's Brad if you haven't seen me before. If you haven't seen me before, I make content on here and short for one on Instagram and TikTok. Of course, talking about football shirts in the Premier League, in the Championship, and of course my team, Sheffield United. For Sheffield United in the Championship this season, we've been quite poor. But for the rest of the league, it's been alright. Of course, the promotion race is red hot at the moment. And like I mentioned, the EFL handed out their awards on Sunday, so I thought I'd do the same in this video. Just before we get into this video, if you enjoy this sort of content, leave this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and also go and follow my Instagram and my TikTok. Of course, links in the caption. But as you can see, we've got all the categories of the awards that I'm going to hand out. Of course, the first two awards are pretty bog standard. Of course, player and manager of the season. Then I'm going to look at a couple of teams, the most overwhelming and the most underwhelming. And then we'll do the exact same for players, one that surprised me, one that's underwhelmed me. And then to finish the video off, of course, a good old team of the season. So without any further ado, I think we should just jump straight into it. The manager of the season is so tough because, of course, you've got like Lampard, Helber, Jurkovic, Alex Neil, and then you've got managers that weren't even nominated, such as Tonderecker and Clement. And one of the aforementioned managers, Tonderecker, is getting my manager of the season. It's such a tough one to give because, of course, Lampard's excelled with Coventry as a non-parachute payment team, and you've got like Alex Neil at Millwall, Jurkovic, Hull overperforming expectations. But in terms of the managerial job, I think Tonderecker has done the best. When Will Still got sacked from Southampton in November, they were sitting 21st, and you thought when they gave Tonderecker the job, of course he might finish mid-table at most, because it just felt like it was such a mammoth job for Southampton, of course, after the bad start to the season. Of course, Tonderecker was originally interim manager, but he did that well. He got the permanent job. Of course, people thought that was a honeymoon phase. He had a rough patch of form after he got appointed the manager, but I mean, since the last couple of months, he's been incredible. Of course, Southampton now beaten like 15-16, winning about 13 of them, and of course, they're through to an FA Cup semi-final, beating Premier League, Fulham and Arsenal on the way. I mean, from going to 21st in November to a potential automatic promotion spot is just incredible. And I don't think we've ever seen anything like that in the Championship, to be honest. I can't remember anyway. I just think he's been outstanding for Southampton, done a brilliant job with the players that he's got. Because don't get me wrong, he's a brilliant squad, but of course, Will still wasn't getting the best out of them. But Tonderecker is definitely getting the best out of them players, such as Shea Charles, for example. And even players like Ryan Manning and Howell Bellis, who have shown that form before, were struggling, they've got back to form again. And of course, new signings such as Leo Senza and Kyle Lowry have helped them along the way. I just think he's done an incredible job and deserves this accolade. The next category up is player of the season, of course, another tough choice. The four nominated by the EFL are, of course, Femi Aziz, Zan Potnik, Carl Rushford and Hayden Hackney. And then you've got other players that didn't get nominated, such as Matt Grimes, Imran Luz and Leo Cienza. For me, it was very tough to pick. I've narrowed it down to two between Carl Rushworth and Hayden Hackney. The EFL gave the reward to Hayden Hackney, but I'm giving mine to Carl Rushworth. Don't get me wrong, Hayden Hackney is a brilliant player. Of course, had a brilliant season for Middlesbrough. He'll go on to bigger and better things. But I think Carl Rushworth is just about more deserving of the award. And when you talk about a keeper winning this sort of award, of course, they've had a brilliant season. And I think Carl Rushworth has definitely been the difference between Coventry being in the playoffs and the automatics, in my opinion. If you look at Coventry's team on paper last season compared to this season, there's not too many changes. The only real difference is Carl Rushworth in the net. Of course, they brought Frank Onyeka in January, but still, they were in a good position before that. And of course, last season, they got into the playoffs. Of course, the post start did definitely cost them. But this season, Carl Rushworth has won them so many points, I can't even count. He's an absolutely brilliant shot stopper, of course, decent with his feet as well. And I think sometimes the way he just commands that box and knows where the defenders will be is just brilliant. He's probably a lower level Premier League keeper, in my opinion. He's been on the scene for a couple of years now. Of course, had a loan spell with Hull last season, but this season, Coventry's really stepped up. I wouldn't be surprised if they're going through permanently in the summer, you know. And he's been so impressive in that Coventry squad in the summer. Of course, they pissed the league. It's one of them. It could have gone to either, and I wouldn't have complained, but my personal choice is Carl Rushworth. The next category is the biggest overperforming team. You've got a lot of teams where you wouldn't necessarily expect them as high as they are, such as Hull, Wrexham, Derby, Millwall. But my personal choice for this award, I've gone for Hull City because of the embargoes. Of course, before the season started, they sacked Ruben Sellers. Of course, we know where he went. They brought in Jurkovic, of course, an unknown manager, an unknown quantity to a lot of us. And of course, they got hit with that transfer embargo as well. Couldn't sign free transfers or loan players. So I think a lot of people would predict them to be in trouble again, bottom half, maybe relegation. But the turnaround in the squad and the quality of players is just miraculous. Out of the four EFL nominees, I think Jurkovic was the best of them four. But of course, Tonderecker wasn't nominated for them, so that's why I've gone for him as my manager of the season instead. But he's done such a brilliant job at Hull City. Of course, the calibre of players that they have brought in. Of course, the likes of Semi Ajayi and Ollie McBurney on his free, as well as Gelhardt on loan. And then, of course, getting the best out of the players already at the club, such as Liam Miller, Matt Crooks, Ivor Panda. Of course, Hull are a very weird team. Of course, they don't have much XG in many games. They seem to always get dominated, but find that way to win. Of course, it's a unique play style to say the least. Of course, in recent weeks, they slipped up a little bit. They might not get the playoffs. But despite the disappointment, if they finish 7th or 8th, it'll still be a brilliant season and a massive improvement on last year. And of course, the embargo was only 2 windows, so in the summer, that embargo is lifted. So they've got a chance to go again, try and spend a bit of money, try and improve that squad, see where they are next season. Now we've looked at the biggest overperforming team, look at the biggest underperforming team. Of course, I could have gone for my team, Sheffield United. We're doing a bit better at the moment. Of course, should be in that top 6 at least. But somehow our team has underperformed more than us. And of course, that is Leicester City, who just got relegated last night as you're watching this. And I mean, how on earth have they let that happen? Of course, they got that 6-point deduction, which has ultimately cost them relegation, but still, they should be nowhere near that drop zone. I mean, with some of the players they've got, such as Jordan James and Fatih, they should be nowhere near that relegation zone. I mean, Jordan James Nunes got 11 goals, 4 assists. Fataru's got 9 goals, 7 assists. And I mean, a lot of the players and the team are the same as when they won the championship 2 years ago. Of course, the season started alright under Cifuentes, but it just went down and down and down. They've got a lot of troubles at the club financially. Of course, players on way too high wages. And I know there's a lot of trouble with the ownership and the CFO, John Rudkin. You'll have seen I made a video about that financial thing. It's on my shorts page, on my TikTok and Instagram. Go and check that out if you haven't already. I've dived deeper into the financial side of things. But on paper, with the team they have, they should be nowhere near the relegation zone. A lot of players massively underperforming because of fans getting against the team and the owners. And I mean, they've got a mammoth job on their hands in the summer, of course, to rebuild and go again in League One. Because League One is a bad place to get stuck in. As a Sheffield United fan, I know we spent 6 years there. I mean, you look at some of the teams that are there now, Bolton, Huddersfield, Reading, they were in the Premier League the last 10, 15 years. And now they're spending, what, 2, 3, 4 consecutive years in League One, if not more. So it just shows that League One next year for Leicester City won't be an easy task at all. The next category is the biggest surprise player. Of course, there's a few players that could have gone for this category. There's a lot of players in the league this year that have performed above expectations. But this one particular player I think has really impressed me at his age and his new position. And that is, of course, Luke Ayling, who's been transitioned to a centre-back this season at the age of 34. He's been with Middlesbrough for a couple of years now, of course, playing right-back like he did for Leeds so brilliantly. But of course, this season he's taking on a new role, of course, playing at centre-back for the majority of the campaign. And at 34 years old, of course, you're coming down to the end of your career. You don't really expect to change positions. But I think he's changed position from a right-back to a centre-back so brilliantly and so effortlessly. Because if anything, in these peak years, he's definitely got better as a centre-back than a right-back. And it's made him more impressive. Luke Ayling isn't the tallest. He's only just under 6'1". And of course, for a centre-back, your height is your main attribute, of course, to win more headers than that. But that hasn't bothered Luke Ayling. Of course, he's still been brilliant in the air and on the ground in terms of duels. And I think he deserves more flowers because I think he's quite underrated in this Middlesbrough team. Because I mean, this year he's looked so comfortable at centre-back. He hasn't looked an issue at all. And of course, even when Hellberg came in, of course, he's seen a lot more of the ball alongside Melander. Of course, he's comfortable with that as well. And I think he's definitely surprised me this season and deserves his flowers. Now moving on to the biggest disappointment. Of course, there's plenty of them as well this season. There's a lot of players in this league that haven't performed to the levels they should be. And some of them players as well have been signed for big money, such as the one I'm about to talk about. But for one reason or another, they've just not performed, not got the goals they needed or the defensive actions they needed, depending on the position. And the player I want to speak about is, of course, Kyogo of Birmingham. Of course, we mainly know him from his spell at Celtic. Of course, he was so prolific in the Scottish League. He was quite disappointed at Rennes before Birmingham bought him for about 10 million last summer. And it's fair to say he's definitely not been a success in the league at all. He's played 28 matches in the Championship, about 1,000 minutes overall. And in that time, he's only scored once away to Sheffield Wednesday, the worst team in the league. He scored a couple more goals in cup competitions against Cambridge and Sheffield United in the EFL Cup, of course. But that was under Ruben Sella, so it just doesn't count. And I mean, when you sign a player for 10 million, you expect so much more than 3 goals in all competitions, 1 in the league. And I mean, 10 million as well, it's massive for a team like Birmingham, newly promoted League One team. Of course, the majority of their goals have come from Marvin Dux and Jay Stansfield. But you think at the start of the season, if you were betting on who would be the top scorer, it'd definitely be Kyogo, wouldn't it? In the second half of the season, before he got his injury in March, of course, he was going to play some appearances, 10-20 minutes. And I think that just definitely shows how far down the pecking order he has fell. And it's fair to say if he leaves in the summer, I don't think they'll get anywhere near 10 million back for him. Now moving on to the most improved. This is similar to the biggest surprise, but we're going for more improvement. There's a lot of players that have upped the game this year. One that sticks out to mind is Tristan Kramer at Millwall. He was close to being in this category, but I've gone for this other player because of the goals he scored. And that is, of course, Dan Vypotnik. Last season, in 42 Championship games, he managed 7 goals. And one of them was a penalty, so call it 6 non-penalty goals. Whereas this season, he played one less, of course, played 41, but he's got 22 goals and 3 assists. And the best thing about that stat, only 4 of them were penalties, so of course 18 non-penalty goals. And it's fair to say this season he definitely upped his game in terms of scoring, of course he's been way more clinical. I think Swansea have slightly improved, but they're not improved massively for him to have that big jump. They've brought in some better players, they're a bit better team this season, but of course you'd think if he scored 22 goals, a bit around the playoffs. But I think it's always so impressive when a striker scores that many goals, of course, in an average team. Because it's all well and good when you're getting service 46 games a season, score 20, 30 goals. But when you're struggling in games, you're not getting that service, you're not the better team, of course it's hard to get them goals away. So to score 18 from open play is quite impressive in my opinion. And it's definitely a real credit to Dan Vypotnik, he's been excellent this season. Now we've looked at all the individual awards, let's look at the team of the season. And there we go guys, that's my team of the season, as you can see next to me. Of course, starting off in the net, Carl Rushford, of course my player of the year winner. I've already waxed lyrical about him, he's been so brilliant in the net, of course winning Coventry, a lot of points. There's no really debate in terms of keepers, of course Perez has had a decent half the season, but over the season not been many better keepers or players over the division. Of course at right back is Milan Van Ewijk of Coventry City. Of course he's been brilliant this season, 8 assists from right back, being the standout right back in the division, and he's been so influential to Coventry, of course down that right hand side, bowling up down. To be fair, he's been a brilliant player for Coventry for the last 2 or 3 years. I'm surprised that got a bigger move. And I reckon next season in the Premier League he'll have a step up similar to Jayden Bogle, because Jayden Bogle was brilliant in the Championship and cemented himself as a Premier League player now. And I think Milan Van Ewijk will have a similar trajectory. At right centre back is Tristan Kramer. He's been the best centre back in the division this year. He's been so influential in Millwall, getting that second spot as of now. And Millwall have been so impressive, of course, a defensive record, even without Tanganga, who they lost in the summer. It was a big task to replace someone of his quality, but of course Tristan Kramer's coming from his loan spell and done brilliantly. So I think there's absolutely no debate about that position. For my left centre back, I've gone for Harwood Bellis of Southampton. Somehow the EFL one had Callum Doyle, and I don't know how, it just wrecks him in it. But Harwood Bellis for me has been the second best centre back he gets in his team team easily. There's players like Caleb Taylor or Bobby Thomas I think are close, but Howard Bell is better. And of course, he's been a big reason that's why Southampton have been so good over these last few months. Of course, that defensive prowess. Of course, he played in the Premier League last season. The first Southampton didn't go to plan. The start of the season as well, he was quite underwhelming. But the second half of the season under Tanaka, he's definitely stepped up. And I think he's very well worthy of a position in this team. At left back, I've gone for Josh Tymon. Of course, 1 goal, 9 assists. It was very close between him and Ryan Manning for this left back spot. I'm going with Tymon. Until we played Swansea a few weeks ago, I didn't realise how good of a season he was actually having. He's always been a solid Championship player, but of course this season he's definitely excelled. And he also got the goal of the year as well, which is a bonus for an absolute peach of a strike. Of course, for Swansea to have 2 players in the team this season, you think they'd be in the playoffs, but players such as Tymon and Vipotnik have definitely stepped up above the rest for Swansea, and I think Tymon's definitely worthy inclusion in this team. The first centre mid is of course Hayden Hackney. Of course, he's been brilliant for Middlesbrough this season. He's a real talent in this league, and he's definitely going on to bigger and better things in Middlesbrough, whether they get promoted or not this season. I think he's a very technical midfielder, good on the ball, good without the ball. Of course, he's destined for England one day, surely. And of course, you can definitely tell in the last few games that he's been injured for Middlesbrough because they've been shocking. And with that run of form they've had since he's been injured, of course, it shows a real quality that he brings to that team. And of course, his partnership with Aidan Morris in the middle has been brilliant to watch this season. I mean, most games when you watch Middlesbrough with Hayden Hackney in that team, you can see he stands out. So there's absolutely no way he wasn't getting in his team. The second central midfielder is of course Matt Grimes. Of course, he's a title winner now with Coventry, such an elite midfielder in this league. He's always been a decent midfielder in this level for the last 5-6 years. Of course, he went to Coventry last January, and that move has definitely paid off for him because of course he stepped up another level at Coventry. I mean, he's so influential in that midfield. Of course, the amount of passes he makes, of course, the tempo he dictates, and you'll definitely do well to find a better midfielder at this level the way he controls that tempo. And then the final inclusion is Imran Loser of Watford. Of course, Watford this season, like most seasons, they've been back in the Championship. They've been quite poor, but he's definitely stood out in that Watford team. Of course, 7 goals, 9 assists. And like I mentioned about Vipotnik and Tymon, when you're in the Championship team this season as a mid-table player, it shows you're a really good player. He's got one of the highest average rates in the league. Of course, most games he does perform to a solid level, and I think Watford have definitely let him down. I think he gets moving somewhere, whether it's Premier League or high-end Championship, because he's 26. Of course, he can't waste his prime years of his career at a team like Watford, where they change manager every 2 minutes. Whether he's Premier League quality, I don't know, but definitely top-end Championship, a better club than Watford, surely. But I think he was an easy choice to put in the team of the season. On the left wing is, of course, Southampton's Leo Cienza. He's been the main reason that Southampton have climbed up the table month after month. Of course, they're now sitting in 3rd or 4th, and he's been a real shining light in that team. Of course, 7 goals and 10 assists, and he's an excellent player to watch on that wing, the way he finds in spaces. I just think he's an absolute quality player. Of course, Southampton were poor at the start of the season, but he's definitely grown with them. And at 27, he's definitely hitting the peak years of his career. Of course, he's performing that way with 17 goal involvements, and I think it was a brilliant pickup by Southampton, of course, from the German league, from Heidenheim, and he's definitely been worth the money and more. On the right, I've gone for Femi Aziz, a brilliant season at Millwall. Of course, they're sitting second at the moment. Of course, 9 goals and 7 assists for him on that right wing for Millwall this season. And I mean, he's been so influential in the way they play. Of course, bombing down that right hand side, he's been so excellent to watch, and he's been a real driving force for this promotion push. Of course, the guaranteed players could still get automatic, and if they do go up to the Premier League one way or another, he's definitely a big part of that. Of course, in 23-24, he had that standout year with Reading in League One, and last season at Millwall didn't do too much, but this season he's definitely showing his worth. He's stepped it up to such a good level, so I think he's definitely worthy inclusion at right wing in this team. And then up front, like I've spoken about in this video, Zan Vipotnik, as you're right, has done well, getting 16 goals, but of course Vipotnik, 22 goals and 3 assists. I've mentioned it before in this video, when you're scoring that many goals for a team like Swansea, you definitely deserve to be in this team. Of course, 25 goal involvement in 42 matches, that's of course just over a goal involvement every other game. I've already waxed lyrical about him. Of course, he's been brilliant for that Swansea team, and it'll be interesting to see next season whether he's a one-season wonder in the Championship or he builds on this, because if Swansea keep players like Vipotnik and Galbraith and build around them, they could definitely be up in the playoffs next season. But for me, Vipotnik definitely had to be in this team. And with that, guys, that concludes my Championship awards. Obviously, this is all down to opinion. I may have got one wrong. You'll have to let me know in the comments, and also let me know in the comments who you'd have given these awards to. As always, if you enjoy this sort of content, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and go and follow my other platforms. Of course, I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and X. The links are in the caption. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying the content. I'm looking forward to making more over the summer with Sheffield United, the World Cup, then the new season starting. But for now, I'll see you guys in the next one.